Thank you. So now, just before I get started, I do have a tendency to get a bit excited when I present. So if I start to talk too fast, feel free to tell me to slow down, okay? And today is an especially exciting topic, so I may get very fast. I'm going to be talking about creating minimally disruptive formulations. First of all, I'm going to be going through what a minimally disruptive formulation is, and then I'll be going through the formulation principles of creating minimally disruptive formulations, as well as the stability checks, evaluations, and considerations you need to make. So, most importantly, what are these minimally disruptive formulations and why are they becoming such a big trend? Well, the typical development timeframe, if you're doing everything properly and if everything goes well, is going to take around 12 months or more. And formulators or quality control people in the room will know that a lot of that is taken up in your stability and product evaluations. So what we do with a minimally disruptive formulation is we cut a lot of those timeframes shorter by making sure we create a chassis, a base formula that can accommodate small formulation changes but enable us to really make big marketing claims, make sure it still meets aesthetic and stability requirements, and we want to do this in a very stable base so that we can make the changes with good confidence that the product is still going to perform extremely well, it's still going to feel great, it's going to please our market, and it's going to be stable. Of all things, you do not want a product recall ever. So we need to really test the robustness of any formula that you're going to use as your chassis for a minimally disruptive formulation, and I will go through that in more detail in a few slides. So one of the major trends we're seeing is a trend toward fast fashion innovation, and that is where your concept developer asks you to create a product formulation to use one of the latest materials that have been launched. So for example, something they've seen at this show and they want to launch it by, March or April next year. And again, if you're a formulator or someone involved in quality control in this room, you're allowed to laugh at that, because that's quite laughable. If we are going to conduct all the required stability and evaluation checks, to go to market with something in 3 or 4 months is a bit of a joke. But it doesn't make your concept developer happy, and it's certainly not turning product over fast enough, because guess what? Your competitors are doing this. So how do you do this? You have to do this to keep up. So how do you do it without increasing your risk too much? And that's what I'm going to talk through in a moment. So we're finding consumers are demanding new products much faster than before. They're following fashion principles, which is very fast to market. You need to get to market first, or fast at least, with a very strong marketing message. And of course, you can't have that product fall over a few months after it's been launched. You need to make sure that you're launching product with those revolutionary actives first to maximise your market opportunities. So we use a predictable formulation base, but it needs to still be aesthetically very pleasing. Consumers are demanding very pleasing sensory bases as well. So you need to make sure you're selecting materials in that base that's pleasing the aesthetic requirements of your consumer, but still not affecting that base chassis too much that you're impacting the stability. We need to minimise evaluation time with anticipated performance and minimise stability testing with relative confidence. Now again, most of you would be aware that stability testing, accelerated stability testing, even if you're conducting it properly, you're still looking at 6 to 9 months accelerated testing minimum, and that's still only a guide. It's still only confidence in launching to market. Well, using minimally disruptive formulation concepts, we're now going to reduce that to 4 to 6 weeks. And again, anyone who's ever been involved with planning or conducting stability trials is probably looking at that going, how on earth are you conducting stability trials that are going to give us any sort of confidence in 4 to 6 weeks? Well, I'm going to show you in a moment how you can do that. And you believe me by the end of this presentation. Okay, so what you can see here, this is the concept of minimally disruptive formulations. So we are now taking that 12 months plus time frame and we are now squashing it into 3 to 4 months. Now, how do we do this without impacting performance? And more importantly, and I keep saying it, but again, it's so incredibly important. And for any concept developers in the room that get sick of hearing their R&D department say stability, 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 I'm saying it too. It's so important. There is nothing worse than a product recall. So you're going to see some of the tests that we put the chassis through and some of the really important formulation principles that need to go into creating the chassis so that you don't risk that. You can never risk that, okay? Even if you're going to follow these concepts and fast fashion principles, never compromise stability. It's just too big an expense for any company. So be clever, and I'm going to show you how to do that. Okay, so stability enhancing factors. Now, I'm talking about minimally disruptive formulations specifically here. I'm not talking about if you're creating a highly innovative, groundbreaking, beautiful feeling product where that's the important features and high performance, where you want high aesthetics, high performance, you need to follow normal formulation timelines, okay? The minimally disruptive formulations don't give you that kind of flexibility and the same amount of confidence you're going to need. So it's one or the other. Okay, still doesn't mean you can't have a beautiful, high-performing, minimally disruptive formulation. It just means if you want to be truly unique, truly revolutionary, and use some of the materials that don't fit this formulation principle, then you just can't risk it. Does that make sense for everyone? Excellent. Okay, but I'm talking about minimally disruptive formulations today, so I'm going to focus on what it takes to create a really good, stable chassis. Okay, really importantly, you need a gum or polymer to help stabilise that formula, whether it be an emulsifier, a surfactant, whatever it is, you need a gum or polymer. That is going to help you stabilise and build good stability into your base formulation. And it needs to be electrolyte resistant. And this is because the entire concept of a minimally disruptive formulation is you don't know what you're going to be adding at the other end. Okay, you're going to be adding actives, lipids. These materials could challenge your base formula a lot. They may not challenge it much at all. But you need to create your base chassis to tolerate all sorts of conditions. So you need to pick a gum or polymer that is electrolyte resistant so that if you add a material that is going to create electrolytes, then it's not going to affect your base chassis. Does that make sense? Very, very important ingredient decision. It is a good idea to include multifunctional surfactants or emulsifiers, and again, that way you're limiting the input of various materials but still getting stability and good aesthetics from the end product. Okay? More materials you include in your base chassis, the more risk that something can go wrong when you add another active at the other end. Remember, the entire concept of these products and these bases, I've got examples here, you can have a play with them later. The entire concept of this is I could go out onto that floor and pick any material, add it to this base chassis, and you'll still have a beautiful product. That's what I'm talking about. That product. Now, these have also been tested very robustly, so I could quite literally go out on the floor, pick any material, pick the most challenging material on the floor, glycolic acid. I'm going to add that to this, and I'm still going to have a stable product, and you can go to market really fast. That's what we're talking about here. So we're picking electrolyte resistant gum or polymer, and we're picking a multifunctional surfactant or emulsifier. You need to pick a broad spectrum, wide compatibility preservative. This is always tough, okay? And when you're dealing with different philosophies, it makes your selection even harder. So, just to prove a point today, I'm going to talk you through some base formulations that suit cheap synthetic bases and green cosmos bases. Who's excited now? And I'm not going to do it just for emulsions, I'm also going to do it for surfactants. See, I get excited. Okay, you need to make sure that you've got a suitably appealing philosophy with your base chassis, and again, I'm doing it across natural and cheap type concepts in both emulsions and surfactants just to prove how it's done and guide you on that. And of course, you're picking materials that are going to suit multiple philosophies. Again, the whole point of a minimally disruptive formula is that you can add pretty much whatever you want to it, and it's going to appeal to a broad consumer group. And contract manufacturers in the room, listen out, because these are a great way for you to please those very demanding concept developers that want to go to market within a month. Okay, that's still a little bit too tight, but it's the only way you're going to possibly get there. You would add other shelf life enhancing factors such as antioxidants or chelating agents. Again, you don't know what's getting added at the end. So you're creating a base chassis so that you can add just about anything to it, and your formula is still going to have a good shelf life and still going to feel good. Are we getting the concept? Excellent. So, you're going to say, Belinda, how are you going to do it? Hang on, I'll get there in a minute. Stability testing is the next thing I want to talk about, because you must be really exhaustive. So you spend the time on developing your base chassis. This you don't rush, okay? And again, the entire point is that you would test your base chassis so exhaustively that, again, I could go out on that floor and pick just about any material, put it in here, and it's still going to be stable. Because these bases that I've developed here have taken in all these factors, have been robustly tested, and have passed. So do not rush your base chassis. Does that make sense? After you've created your base chassis and tested it comprehensively and it's passed, then it's just a matter of swapping your active or your lipids or what other materials, and it will be able to handle those small changes. Does that make sense for everyone? Yep. Okay. So the more resilient your chassis, the more exhaustively you test it, the more confidence you'll have in any version you create. You need to make sure you conduct PET, and again, your preservative selection is going to be one of your tough points, especially if you're formulating to a green philosophy, because the pH compatibility of a lot of preservatives that are allowed in natural or Cosmos formulas is quite limited. But again, once you've picked that preservative, you know, it should accommodate a lot of materials, a lot of different types of materials being added to it. Conduct your freeze thaw 6 cycles, conduct high temperature testing, and again you can see we're talking about at least 9 to 12 months of 40-degree testing on your base chassis. So this is the part you can't rush. You can't rush that base chassis creation. And then of course, specific gravity, viscosity, pH of the base should vary hopefully 10% at tops over the 2 to 3 year real-time testing. Now, you don't have to wait the full 2 to 3 years on your base chassis, but you should be exhaustively testing it for at least 9 to 12 months at accelerated conditions, because remember, the base is what you have to have your confidence in. So, let's have a look at some examples and what we've done. So this is example chassis 1, just a cheap base emulsion. What have I put in here? I've built the functional materials of this formula is using electrolyte tolerant polymer, a high HLB non-ionic waxy emulsifier to build my body. It's not charge affected. And then lipids and humectants I've used, cheap, readily available lipids and humectants that don't oxidize. Again, so I'm creating a very stable base. I've got a broad spectrum wide compatibility preservative in here. It's got an appealing philosophy, very cheap materials, good skin feel. It's got a small amount of antioxidant in it, even though this particular base doesn't actually need it. I've put a small amount of antioxidant in there just so that antioxidant selection later doesn't have to happen. I don't want to add anything unnecessary to my base chassis other than what other material I'm putting in there. So for example, I've then taken this base chassis, once it's been tested, proven to be very robust, and then I've just added 4% lipid to it at the end. So basically I've got my base, 4% any lipid, chuck it in. Do all the testing again, and again I can shorten my testing at this point. My accelerated testing, freeze thaw, 3 months, or not even 3 months, 2 to 6 weeks at 40 degrees. and see how it comes out. Freeze thaw obviously is a really good indication with lipid added into my emulsion base, and there was no difference, no change, okay? So that means if I wanted to add an active that was in a lipid base, I could add it to this base in 4% and there's no problem. I can go to market fast. The other thing I did with this base was add 5% of glycerin-based extracts into this base. Tested it again using high temperatures freeze thaw, and again, no change to the base. So I could go out there again, I could pick any active that's in a glycerin or water-soluble base, put it into this base formula, no change. I can go to market fast. Is that making sense for everyone? If you want a copy of this presentation or to know what I've used in this base chassis, please come and see me, give me your card later. I can send you full details. Okay, and then just to make sure that you weren't disappointed with today's presentation, I've done it with a green Cosmos suitable base. So same thing, I've created my base using the functional materials I selected, a natural gum that's non-ionic, an emulsifier, I've picked high HLB non-ionic waxy blend. You do need to be careful with these types of formulations because I need to build body to my cream. I use high HLB emulsifiers, and of course if you use too many high HLB non-ionic waxy emulsifiers, particularly ones that are green or Cosmos suitable, you end up with that soapy effect. So you do need to be careful of that in your formula. So you do need to weigh it up a little. You don't want to risk stability problems later. You want your base chassis to be extremely robust, but you also don't want that soapy effect. And natural emulsifiers do have a tendency to do that. So careful selection to avoid that. I've used medium flow, cheap, readily available and green lipids and humectants in this base chassis. I've used the broadest spectrum preservative I could. Again, you're limited with these types of formulations by what you're allowed to put into a Cosmos base. I've used easily sourced green materials that have a good skin feel, and I've built in antioxidant, in this case a tocopherol at 1%, because remember I don't know what I'm adding at the other end. So I want to make sure my base is able to tolerate, even if I was to add a high portion of a natural lipid, I want my base to be able to tolerate that high input and still have good antioxidant protection. So just to prove that it was able to cope, I did exactly the same things. I put 4% of lipid, natural lipid, probably even organic, I'd have to check what I did, probably would have been organic, lipid into that base, and it's turned out fine. And then I've added 5% of extracts, again in a water-soluble base, into this base chassis, and again, it's come out fine. You will see there's slight colour difference, but that's got to do with the organic lipid and the natural extract I've used, but again, I've complied with Cosmos philosophies in selecting the materials, and I've put that into the base and then made sure it's still stable. So I could go to market really fast with these formulas with very good confidence that it's going to last the full required shelf life. So I've tested then the pH compatibility and viscosity for all ingredients, and again with the Cosmos base in particular it was harder with selections, but I made sure that the materials could accommodate as broad a pH shift as possible. Again, there was some limitations, but have to make sure that you're selecting your materials to also accommodate as much variation as possible because you don't know what you're adding at the other end. Evaluations include rub-in, playtime, skin feel. Again, with Cosmos products, you had to make sure they didn't feel too tacky. That's one of the challenges you need to overcome. So you need to put the time, again, into the base chassis. As I've mentioned at the end, I've added 5% water or glycerin-based extracts, or I've added 4% lipid, which has consisted of 1.5% essential oils plus 0.5% lipid or 2% lipid, or in some cases I've added a straight 4% lipid. And this is again to the finished product. So I've just added it straight in. Preliminary stability checks, 6 cycles freeze thaw and 4 to 6 weeks at 40 degrees before manufacture. And of course you would extend that accelerated testing, but by the time you do that, your product's already manufactured and you're already heading out to the marketplace. So you want that relative confidence in your base chassis. Okay, just to prove it can be done, I've now done it with foaming bases. So this is a cheap foaming base. Selection has been very, very important with these products. So again, I've used good formulation principles, anionic, amphoteric and non-ionic surfactant combination to boost my foam, increase my mildness, even though it's still a cheap base. I've used a surfactant-specific polymer that's able to tolerate some extreme environments, and also in picking that polymer I made sure that it can handle quite a good bead loading. As you can see here, this is full of beads, so you can have a closer look later. And I've done that because while my base chassis doesn't need it, I don't know what my concept developer is going to demand of my formula. So what if they ask me to add lipid? Can it handle it? Yes. What if they ask me to add a heap of beads? Can it handle it? Yes. What if they ask me to add a heap of mica for a pearlescent effect? Can it handle it? Yes. It comes down to your material selection. And as I said, your gummer polymer, whether you're making an emulsion or a surfactant, your gummer polymer selection is absolutely crucial. And none more relevant than you can see when I'm adding a whole heap of beads to my surfactant base. I need that gummer polymer to help stabilise that situation. Now, if my concept developer doesn't need beads added, it doesn't matter. But what if they do? I'm not creating a base to suit one formula here. I'm creating a base to suit 100 possible variations. That's what we're doing. And again, then it means we can get to market very fast. In this base product, I've also added a superfatting agent that must be interchangeable, because that superfatting agent will often build the marketing story or the product story of my surfactant product. So I've built that into the base, and I've tried a couple of different variants to make sure I can swap my superfatting agent without it affecting my base. Like I say, that can be an important part of the marketing philosophy of the product. The different superfatting agents that we add can be part of the marketing story. Again, that broad spectrum, wide compatibility preservative, cheap materials, good skin feel, high foam, low irritancy. These are basic essentials of any foaming product. Antioxidants not required, but do you want to put a small amount in just in case? Again, you don't know what you're going to get asked to add to the base, so make the base really stable. And of course, chelating agent, because I've used an anionic surfactant. Now, just to really challenge the situation, I've created a green foaming base. Now, this is not 100% green. It is very close to that. The main reason, of course, I have an anionic surfactant in here that is not completely green. The rest of the materials are true green philosophies. So again, I've used good surfactant formulation principles, anionic, amphoteric, non-ionic surfactant blend. Again, the amphoteric's not completely green either. I've used a really good gelling agent. Now, the trick with this, of course, is to pick a gelling agent at an amount that's not going to leave you with, a bottle of clunk. And anyone who's created a green type surfactant product and used a natural gum would know that that's one of your challenges when you're creating the viscosity in these materials, to make sure that you can build that viscosity using a natural gum but not end up with a really gummy, ugly looking product. But that obviously has affected the colour. But again, why have I done that? So I can suspend beads if I'm asked to suspend beads. I can suspend mica if I'm asked to suspend mica, and that way my natural base formula can also handle lipid being added to it. And this is straight lipid. This is not an ethoxylated lipid being added. This is straight lipid, and it's still stable. And of course, other materials that I select, the preservative has to suit green philosophies. The antioxidant chelating agent needs to suit green philosophies as well. Again, we're testing the pH range. We're evaluating the foam, the clean and the wash-off skin feel of the base chassis. Particularly with the green product, we're making sure that any additional inputs that we're putting in are also green, and that it can handle green material inputs. We need to consider packaging suitabilities, tubes versus pumps. How is the end product to be packed? So we could, in that case, reduce the gum a little if we need to put it into something where we're going to have better flow. It is quite a viscous product. Again, we've done that so that we can suspend beads. Okay, so if we didn't need to suspend beads, we could bring the gum input back a little. But again, remember, I'm building this base chassis because I don't know what I'm going to be asked to put in at the other end. In the formula to challenge it, we've interchanged superfatting agent, added 1.5% essential oil, and again, anyone who's created a green surfactant base will then understand why I've started with so much gum, because of a lot of essential oil input will decrease my viscosity quite dramatically. So you need to, again, build that base chassis not knowing what's going to be asked to be added at the other end. Preliminary stability checks, again, 6 cycles freeze thaw, 4 to 6 weeks, 40 degrees, and then extended real-time testing. So, key principles when creating your minimally disruptive formulations. Check your theory, and don't just check it once, check it again, check it again, check it again, okay? Remember, your gum or polymer needs to be electrolyte tolerant. That's one of the most important fundamental aspects of creating these products. If you're creating emulsions, you need to make sure you're picking non-ionic emulsifiers. And again, you're then using your gum to help support temperature stability over broad climates. You're probably aware that if you use non-ionic emulsifiers, you can get climate affecting the viscosity of the product if it travels from very cold to very warm regions. So again, using that gum or polymer helps stabilize against those viscosity related changes. You need to make sure that you're not introducing charge to your formula where you can help it. Again, you don't know what's being added at the other end. Make sure that you test the end product very robustly. You want something to go wrong with your base, if possible, until the point where you don't have anything go wrong with your base. Then you know you've got a base chassis you can use as a minimally disruptive formulation. Then you would conduct minimal stability testing after that point, but you need to conduct that really robust testing on your base chassis to begin with. And again, make sure you think of all the possible different variants. Again, like I say, I've demonstrated it here by adding quite a significant loading of beads to make sure that my formula is going to handle that many beads. I've added essential oils to make sure, especially in surfactant base, to make sure it's going to handle a high essential oil loading. I've tested the base creams with some very acidic conditions to make sure they're not going to fall apart. They're still going to maintain their viscosity and their stability. So test, retest, make sure it's good theory to begin with. And of course, last thing, it's never a guarantee, okay? So even if you've tested and retested and you go, yeah, but Belinda said this is going to work, this is great, this is all I need to do, something could still go wrong. So still, it's having confidence in the end product, and you do need to sometimes weigh up commercial risk versus commercial gain. But I hope I've given you some really good insight into how to get to market fast with some of the amazing materials you see on the floor. That's how your competitors are doing it without increasing their risk too high. So now hopefully you can do it too. Thank you very much.